Hey everyone, this is your host, Chris Hasek-Watt at the Love Means Nothing Tennis Podcast. I have a very special guest today. We have a Hall of Fame coach, a man who has coached, I think, 8 Grand Slam champions, 4 Hall of Fame inductees. His character was played on a Oscar-winning movie just recently. We have the legend, maybe the greatest coach of all time with us, Rick Maccis. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for the intro. I just got off the court and I'm ready to go. So we're going to have a lot of fun.
Thanks, Rick. Okay, why don't we just take this back for some of my viewers that may not know just your history, how you got into coaching, how you got into tennis. You just want to give us a bit of I know you're extremely passionate about the sport. So can you just give us a bit of a breakdown how it all started for you?
Yeah, well, first off, I love this question. And you could imagine, because I've done over 200 podcasts probably in the last 4 years. So, everybody wants to know kind of how I got started. I actually played golf when I was younger. I grew up in a small town, Greenville, Ohio, 20 miles southwest of Dayton, Ohio. And I never really played tennis. I played golf. And then at 10 years old, game-changing life situation, my father passed away. We couldn't afford to join the country club, because both my mom and dad were like championship golfers. I used to play all the time. I was relentless. Sure. And so then I just went down to the park. I lived about a half mile from a park, and I picked up a racket. This was the late 60s, and I hit against the wall. And I really liked it because it always came back. I just loved the sound of the ball hitting against the wall. And I just fell in love with the sport. And that was at age 12 years old. Now listen to this. This is crazy. I never had a lesson in my life. I taught myself how to play. And at 18, I was ranked number 1 in the Ohio Valley. And I picked up a racket at 12. It's not where you start, it's where you finish. Everybody should remember that. A lot of guys that used to crush me like a grape at 14, I probably wouldn't even play with them at 17, Yeah. But I'm in the Hall of Fame for basketball and tennis in my hometown. I knew I was never going to be good enough to play pro tennis. I played satellites and stuff like that, beat a lot of All-Americans. So I could play. But at 22, I kind of got into coaching, and I liked helping others more than helping myself. And I always like to analyze things and figure things out. And as you know, you get the knowledge as you go along. And it all started at age 22 in Ohio. To fast forward that story, I eventually ended up coming to Florida in 1980 to Greenleaf Golf and Tennis Resort. I never had aspirations to even work with juniors. I just like helping anybody, anytime, anywhere, that type of guy. And then in 1985, I was at Greenleaf. I've turned it into one of the top vacation destinations in the country. Big influence from Dr. James Lair, sports psychologist. We did stuff on the mind and body with corporate people. But in 85, a guy from Winter Haven, Florida, brought his 3 sons to me. One of them was 9-year-old Tommy Ho. To fast forward that story, I started working with juniors. He became the most dominant junior player ever, more than Courier, Agassi, Chang, Sampras, Al Parker, 15 gold balls by age 15. And Capriati, dad, saw him serve, said, I want my daughter to serve like Tommy. So she ended up coming, and, both of them won the 18 nationals. One was Jennifer was 12. That record will never be broken. Tommy was 15. That will never be broken. So here we are. Then the Williams family came. So here we are all these years later. And what's amazing is I teach just as much today. I teach like 50 hours, 7 days, as I did back then. So I still love it, still have the passion. And I think it's good for anybody out there. If you love what you do, you feel like you're hardly working.
Yeah, that's incredible, Rick. Would you say that what also drove you into coaching? Because I can kind of relate in a way that I'm from a small town. We had no indoor courts throughout the winter. So I would show up at tournaments in the middle of winter, and I hadn't played tennis for a month and a half. And I'd go into these tournaments and, I'd win some, I'd lose some. But overall, I was competing against guys that had coaching on a day-to-day basis with all of the infrastructure built around them. Was part of the reason that you went into coaching because you felt like, for yourself, you never had that for you. And if you potentially had that coaching, that you could have been a professional tennis player, made it top 10, top 20 in the world, and you wanted to give these opportunities to other players that may not have had what you did not have?
First off, interesting question. Maybe that was somewhere inside of me to be able to help others, because I never really had that. So, but I think that was a part of it. But I also think the fact that I had that maybe gift to analyze and communicate and motivate and educate. And as you know, you learn the education as you go along. But no, that's a great question. I think somewhere inside of me, that was it. I wanted to help maybe someone achieve their goal. Little did I know it would just take on a life of its own. And, I would just expedite the learning curve and make a lot of these kids that already had a lot of potential become number one in the world or fulfill their dreams.
And yeah, that's interesting. And you mentioned Tommy Ho, being your first, I guess the first kind of kid that really like went on to an incredible junior career, one of the best junior careers in America ever. And then, you were able to build on that. Because of that, Capriati came. And because of that, the Williams, and you can go on. How much in building an academy and a career is about having like that first good player, that adds that level of credibility and it just brings people to you? What if you didn't have Tommy Ho? Like, what would things have been different? How does the whole coaching career look like when it comes down to starting out and attracting those great players?
I think to back the truck up, that started in 1985. And here we are, 2023, so I think everybody has to understand, you got to prove yourself every day. I'm kind of one of the last of the Mohicans, you know what I mean? And there was no billion-dollar company behind me. And the big thing about my academy or what I do, I drive the engine. I'm on the court 50 hours a week. I do a lot of privates. I have people from all over the world. I do so many Zoom videos in the parking lot at 5:30 in the dark with the birds and the squirrels. You have no idea what I do. So it's a very different thing. My model, it's not a glorified boarding school. It's very different, but it wins and it works. But you got to prove yourself every day. A lot of guys have already checked out at Publix. They didn't want to keep doing it. They're trying to get off the court. Well, I like to be on the court. So I think all that, and the customer says it all, as you know. For people to pay, $800 an hour or whatever for a private lesson and to be booked all the time and to do what I do, you got to deliver the goods. Now, that being said, and this is great for any coach listening, a lot of times once the parents get the knowledge, they start telling me what to do. Okay, as you can imagine with Richard Williams, I should be in the Hall of Fame dealing with that guy. But no, seriously, you got to prove yourself all the time. But yeah, Tommy, people said, whoa, look at this guy, strokes, look at him hit the ball. He wasn't the best athlete. I knew he wasn't going to be that, but he could be top 20 in the world in doubles, which he was. He got to like 80 in singles. So that did help people to give me a look. But people have to understand, I'm trying to get better tomorrow. I got better today. I always try to get better. I don't say, look what I've done. I mean, there's been over 300 and some national championships. And, I've accomplished a lot. But I don't look at it like that. I'm just one of the guys from Greenville, Ohio. I'm one of the guys. I'm so down to earth and approachable. And I think that hands-on approach has made what I do very different, besides the ability to extract greatness in someone. Because once I have whoever on the side of the net, and I need to say this, people ask me all the time who my favorite student is of all time. And there's been a lot. It's not Venus or Serena or Capriati, Roddick, Mosquina, Pierce, Sharapova, Christian Ruud, Darwin Blanche. I could go on, Alicia Park. Who's ever on the other side of the net, that hour, that minute, that second. And that's the way I've been my whole life. And people can feel that no matter what age or level. Even I had the number one 80-year-old adult in the country wanted to learn the ATP forehand. First time in 70 years he hit topspin. So that's just the kind of way I'm put together. And I think it's great for anybody, no matter what you've accomplished. Don't fall in love with that. Okay, next is the most important word.
Right. Interesting. So that's actually really interesting that it's that how you've, your coaching style, because one of my questions that I wanted to ask you was why you didn't go or try to go the Bollettieri route, where you build this huge academy, you sell it to IMG, becomes $1 billion kind of academy or whatnot. I don't know how much Bollettieri made, but I'm sure he did quite well. Is that just not who you are? Was there a level of competition with Bollettieri? Did you guys have a rivalry at any point? What's that relationship like?
First off, these are great questions because no one's really asked me a lot of this stuff. It's interesting because at one time, IMG wanted to buy my brand and everything. I actually went to Orlando and had dinner with Mark McCormick, who's no longer alive. He used to own IMG. They wanted to get involved with me, but it never materialized. But you said it, you hit it on the head. I need to kind of keep control and do what I want to do, and run the show. I just don't want to like maybe work for someone. And maybe that's the real reason. And remember, bigger isn't always better, because that's why a lot of kids, when they get 15, they want a personal coach. Well, they got a personal coach if they want me to be involved, because we probably do more private lessons here than any other academy in the country. It's crazy, because they know the methodology that Dr. Brian Gordon and I put together 15 years ago. So we're cutting edge with biomechanics, besides all the other stuff that I do. So I never really wanted to do that. Okay. And remember, just because it looks bigger, perfect example. When I moved from Greenleaf to Delray, we had 90 kids, and a lot of them were boarding. And I made a lot less money then than I do now, and we have no boarding. Because when you think it's bigger, that doesn't always mean it's better. And IMG with the tennis, they never made money. It was more of a real estate situation
that
was going on there. So from the outside, because I know the inside of how this works, the model that I put together, it's controllable, it's manageable, and at the end of the day, the customer says it all.
It's interesting. And you talked about, you mentioned quickly about some players, when they hit 50 and they want a personal coach or they want to move on, etc. What does that look like, when you're coaching a junior and you take them to a certain level? And then most players, I would say, that are on the tour, they switch coaches at a certain point where they move on from their childhood coach that got them, even in some cases, they win their first Grand Slam and then they move on to another coach. Why do players do that? And what do you think about that?
First off, another incredible question. I think the cards you're dealt at a young age, whether it be the mechanics, listen, you can cost someone millions of dollars just by the wrong grip or wrong backswing or wrong mindset.
Yeah.
Okay. Like Darwin Blanche, I need to bring him up. He's probably the best junior in the world. He's 15. He used to be on the court with me every day, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, all mechanics. When you see this guy serve in forehand, it's amazing, because it was never a rush to put Humpty Dumpty together. But that being said, to answer your question, it's a long time to be with someone. If you start like at age 9, to be with them when they're 22, things change, especially if they get good. Then you get agents involved, you get money involved, and all of a sudden you're not in the front row. You might not even in the back row. You could be out the building, and it becomes a slippery slope. It takes a certain family dynamic with character, so on and so forth. But with the Williamses, I was offered $1 million a year after Venus got her contract to stay coaching them and do nothing else. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to kind of keep my business, but still coach them. But Richard kind of wanted to take it over. So all that being said, I think it's very hard to take it from start to finish. It might be unheard of that I'd rather bake the cake, buy it at Publix, put it in the oven, bake it. And if someone wants to put a little icing on it, I'd rather build the box than sit in the box. Okay. Now, if somebody said, Rick, I'm in the finals of Grand Slam, you want to come and watch, whatever, sure, I would do that. But at the end of the day, I was never a travel coach or a travel buddy. I got to be here every day. So that's a whole nother thing. And like you said, once you lose 3 or 4 times, they go to the next person, where I got something that I've always wanted to keep control over, sleep in my own bed. I do my own thing. And whether you're the best, that's different than maybe being the most famous. If you're on TV and people see you in a box, but most of the dirty work, think of Serena. She had 12, nothing against Patrick, but she had 12 or 13 Grand Slams when he came in. Richard and I obviously did all the heavy lifting to put that together. Not just anything you see with the way they play, which is huge, or the way they hit the ball, for better or worse, the environment that was created to cultivate a champion. That's a whole different animal.
And you mentioned kind of the best or the greatest. And here's a question that you may have not heard before, or somebody may not have asked this before, but there's a lot of, debate around, the GOAT, the greatest of all time, especially in men's tennis, when you've got Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. There's never any conversations around like the greatest coach of all time or who's the best out there. Do you have an opinion on that? Can you even measure being the greatest coach of all time?
I think it's almost impossible because what's the criteria? I think the number one thing about coaching is consistency. And one thing, I've been fortunate, okay? I started in 85 and here we are 23. You know what I'm saying? And the resume, okay, not the awards you won or like you said, the icing, Venus, Serena, that's what people might attract eyeballs. But when you get into coaching, you'd almost have to be on the court with them every day and see what I do with a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old or an adult or someone top 10 in the world, how I say it, why to say it, when to say it, how to correct problems. People come with issues. That's the art of coaching. And this is kind of what I do to expedite the learning curve. But if people are going to look at it like, well, this guy won 20 Grand Slams or whatever, and he was his coach, okay, well, that's a little tricky because that's more like a travel coach that's out there, you know what I'm saying, with a pro or whatever. So tennis is a little different than football, baseball, basketball. It's a little trickier because how I talk to someone top 10 in the world and coach them is going to be very different than an 8-year-old. I'm trying to build a champion and put this together, if that's making sense. So how you determine the greatest coach, people are going to look at people who've won a Grand Slam, and if you're right there with them, but they might just be the most famous because they've been on TV a lot. Because let's face it, there's a lot of stuff out there all over the internet. And I think it's a package that one of the things that I bring, it's more of a package, whether it be with biomechanics, strategic, the mental, it's a whole smorgasbord or medley of how to coach someone.
Right. It's interesting too, because, it's about the style of the coaching and then the style of the student. And if, they mix well together, for instance, and I've talked about this on a previous pod, you have Tony Nadal, who, was obviously a huge influence on Rafa Nadal being one of the greatest tennis players of all time. And then Tony, surprising to a lot of tennis fans, moved over to help with Felix Auger-Aliassime about a year ago. And since that move, he's had basically no success. He's had a terrible year. Now, I'm not blaming that on Tony Nadal, but obviously that relationship has not gone as well as some people hoped or expected. What are your thoughts on that? Is it just some coaches work well with certain players and not with others, just based on the personalities, the types of athletes that they are?
First off, I'd have to be there. I know I keep saying it. I'd have to be there to see what they're doing. I think to look from the outside or read an article or look at results, I think you can't do that. I'd have to be there to know what is going on a regular basis. So that would be the first way I would judge anybody. And you also mentioned something about Nick Bollettieri. Nick and I were great friends. Okay, people, you got to understand, I respect everything that he did. There wasn't a camera he didn't like. He would actually like me to say that. He would mispronounce my name wrong on purpose. I kind of like that. At least he acknowledged me. But listen, he had $1 billion company behind him. I just have my cat and my 3 daughters, so it's a little different thing. But Nadal and Felix, I'd have to actually be there. And let's get this straight. You got to have the thoroughbred to win the Derby. The New England Patriots lost yesterday 34-0. Does that mean Belichick's a hamburger with extra cheese now? When Brady's quarterback, it's a little easier to win those games. So I think you got to be real careful. But if people want to flip it the other way and say, well, Venus and Serena were great athletes. Yeah, but they were taught a certain way to play. They could have been taught defensively. Maybe they had the wrong grip that was changed, like I did with Roddick. I could go on and on about how these little things early on make the difference as you get older. I think when you get on the pro tour, it's a little bit more motivational. It's a little bit more managing it, and it's unfortunate. You almost have to become a babysitter. And a lot of times people are afraid to say anything when they're on the tour to the student. They don't want to lose their job. You know what I'm saying? So it's a little trickier on the pro tour, but obviously you got to have the player and just let it play out and see where it goes.
Right. And just changing topics here a little bit, Rick, have to bring this up. Obviously, you've always been a recognized person within the tennis community, no doubt. But after the movie, King Richard came out, I'm sure that recognition expanded beyond, obviously, the tennis community. How did that change your life, if at all?
My daughter said it best. I'm actually the same person always. Listen, it's too late for me to change. Some people would change. The only thing that changed was everything around me. I didn't change at all. Still on the court 7 days, still teaching 50 hours. I do a lot more stuff on television, whether it be Fox or Outkick, or I've done hundreds of podcasts. Hundreds of millions of people know the name because they saw the movie. And by the way, I had a mustache like you, not like John Berthal. The one he had in the movie was bushy. So they kind of got everything right except the mustache. But no, I think people in tennis kind of know, but that was 30 years ago. But now many more people know exactly what I did and how much I cared. And the girls were like my own daughters. And Richard was my best friend. And think about it. If I don't go out to Compton, if I don't go there and see what I see and then roll the dice financially, we probably wouldn't be talking now because it changed history. So it changed a lot. There's other opportunities around me, whether it be a possible TV show. You know, I do a podcast with David Meltzer, Game Set Live. And I think now people see me doing stuff on TV or podcasts, and they know I'm more of a life coach just as much as a tennis coach. And so, but I'm going to still do exactly what I'm doing as long as I can do it. But there are some other things that are in the oven. And I do sign a lot more autographs and take a lot more pictures. But they got to come on court number one when I'm teaching, because that's like my main office.
Right. And I want to get into that a little bit. But before we do, as far as John Berthnell playing your character, did you spend a lot of time with him? And did he nail the character? Did he you mentioned the mustache, but otherwise, would you say that he was on point?
100%. It shocked me. We talked on the phone a bunch. He looked at all the videos. He read the book. All right. It blew me away. The movie, it was so spot on. I mean, Will Smith, that was scary. He was better than Richard. I'm just telling you, that was crazy stuff. You got to understand, no one had a front row seat better than Rick Maccis, other than maybe Orsine, the wife. So the nuances, the walk, the talk, the subtleties, the clothes, the one-liner, everything in there was so spot on, because Isha, she was heavily involved, one of the older siblings. She was at the academy because I moved the whole family to Florida, and she was there all the time. And how this came out, obviously I was more than happy, because let's face it, when as time goes on, you kind of look at it like Compton, center court, two of the greatest sisters ever, you know, and it can kind of get lost in translation. Not that it bothered me, but the fact that it came out in a movie, it was amazing. But Bernthal, it was incredible. You know, it really was. And I actually had to ask my daughter, am I that wired up all the time? Am I that much? She goes, Dad, that's the way you are all the time. So it made me kind of go, whoa, but I'm still doing exactly what I've always done.
That's cool. And you mentioned that Richard Williams was basically your best friend. Now, you know, his character, obviously there's been a lot of discussion and talk in the tennis community about Richard Williams before this movie came out. And then this movie really profiled him. You know, he's a bit of an eclectic character, maybe difficult to get along with at times. How did that relationship blossom to becoming best friends?
Yeah. First off, I've been asked that a lot too. Listen, part of the art of coaching, I don't only coach the kids, I coach the parents. You know, everybody listening who's a coach, you got to know also when to keep your mouth shut. That's sometimes the best coaching. You know what I'm saying? Because listen, he had a strong personality. You could tell by the movie how stubborn the guy was. And I did a lot of heavy lifting or dirty work when he wasn't there. I would tweak it. I would say, you know, so it was about the girls. I was on a mission. Listen, to buy a $92,000 motorhome and the house and health insurance and hundreds of thousands of dollars and the hitting partners and type to go in. It's one thing to say, I like you, or I believe in you, or maybe other people will come to the academy because you're there. Less people came because they were there. Because I was saying, I think they'll be number one in the world. I think they'll transform the game. They're going to be better than Capriati. People didn't like that. I'm putting them legendary and they haven't done anything yet, you know? So, but no, getting along with Richard was easy because he knew, first off, he was an amazing father. And I've told a lot of people this. Every single day, they would bring their books to the court. And if it rained, they went up in my office. And every single day, both VW and Serena would say, Rick, thank you very much, and give me a hug. People don't know how this was. You know, they just see some guy who's out there saying crazy things or whatever, but he was crazy like a fox. but he was my best friend. And the reason why it evolved, because he knew at the end of the day, I cared about his kids as a father figure, besides knowing what's going on and how to. He always said, you believe in my kids more than me. And I never talked to Venus or Serena about 12 and under tennis. It was all Steffi would get that. Martina would do that. Hingis is going to do that. I was talking to him, and Venus gave the best compliment at the after party. She goes, Rick, we were like brainwashed to be number one. So this mental stuff that went, well, you got to have the thoroughbred. But this mental stuff that went on, it was all about greatness. And it was just one piece of the puzzle, but as you know, an important one.
And we talked a little bit before I hit record here, just about, you getting up at 3:30 in the morning, your work ethic, your dedication. It seemed like, Richard Williams was on that same page. Was that part of the reason? Did he kind of do some research into you and know the level, of dedication that you have to the sport, and he wanted to ingrain that in his daughters?
You've done your homework. Absolutely. When I went out to Compton that night in the hotel room, okay, Venus was on one leg, Serena on the other, hugging, kissing, just like you saw in the movie. This guy pulled out a piece of paper. I thought I was in a deposition. Believe me, and I don't like those depositions. Yeah. And he grilled me. This guy grilled me, but you're right. He knew everything. I didn't get defensive. I respected it. Because if he wanted someone in their circle, someone who's been there, done that, a father figure, role model, and plus I had Jennifer. She was already top 10 in the world at age 14. I respected it. But no, he did his homework, and he knew, because listen, they could have went to Bolletary. They could have went anywhere. Maybe. I don't know. They came to me. We did the deal because he knew I was all in and I was on a mission. And if I wasn't happy with something, it'd be like a woodpecker to keep pecking. And so me and him were cut from the same cloth as far as determination. And if we had to go extra time or start early or go more, people have no idea what was entailed here. Because listen, I was basically doing this. They could have got hurt, or I could have been wrong. There could have been no cheddar at the end of the rainbow. So listen, it was a big gamble, but I was on a mission. You're right. I know that he knew that. And he even said that in the movie. Rick, this is the best decision that you ever made. All right. And by me picking up that phone and going, listen, I never went to see anybody. They either come to the academy or I see them at a junior tournament, get on a plane and go look at somebody who but in the first hour, I didn't see it. I need to finish this. I didn't see it. And I'm going, what in God's name am I doing in Compton, California? Remember, I had Capriati. She was poetry in motion, knees bent in a parking lot, low center of gravity, ball on a string, great fundamentals by the late, great Jimmy Everett. So I'm looking at these two girls, and there's arms and legs and hair flying everywhere. I'm going, what in God's name am I doing in Compton, California? Then we started playing competitive points after an hour, and everything changed. I'm telling you, there was a rage. I never saw, listen to this, in my life, and I haven't to this day, two little kids, especially girls, try so hard. It was scary. Venus was almost 5'9". Her nose was that far off the ground trying to get to the ball. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be world champion, but I'm sitting there going 6 feet, 160, 5'11", 145. I'm projecting down the road. There was a rage. And when you're about that, you're going to handle pressure. So I knew they were bulletproof, but I couldn't see it when we were doing technical things because it was a train wreck. And right then and there, I told Richard, come here. It was more about Venus. I said, Serena she was all over the place. I go, you got the next female Michael Jordan on your hands. That's in the movie. He puts his arm around me, goes, no, brother, man, I got the next two. And I knew they could transcend the sport. And Serena, I need to say this. What I saw, no one saw. She had all the time in the world. And sometimes when you have all the time, especially if you're 10 years old, you can look sloppy. But she knew where I was going to hit it before I did. It was an innate quality. Venus didn't have that. And I'm thinking, okay, and that's on video back in 92. I said all this stuff. And as she got bigger and stronger, I knew what was around the corner. Venus was going to be great, but the little one was like a pit bull, and this could go into orbit.
That's super interesting. I want to unpack that a little bit down the road in our conversation about kind of the qualities and the characteristics of young players when you see potential greatness. You mentioned competitiveness. You mentioned Venus seeming like she had all the time in the world. You know what I mean?
Serena. Yeah,
Serena. Okay.
yeah.
I want to unpack that. Before we do, you saw, early on, very early on, that these are two young girls that could transcend the sport. But you also mentioned that, yeah, it was still a gamble. How did you make a decision? And just to add to that, I believe you referenced in a podcast or something on TV that I heard you speak to before, that you invested, upwards of $1 million into the Williams sisters even before they started playing pro, or at least early in their career. So it was a large financial gamble as well. How did you make that decision, balancing potentially transcending the sport versus just like a financial decision? You obviously run an academy, you have a business as well. So what was your thought process there?
I just saw something that I knew could be number one in the coach. You like to help build greatness. It was different. Two little African-American girls, a father out there, something. This was early 90s. It was 1991. If you were big and strong, you weren't nimble. I thought they were going to bring a different athlete into the sport, which I was right. Now everybody kind of runs and is tall and big and strong. I just saw something. It wasn't even a gamble, even though my time, listen, if I'm there 4 or 5 hours a day with VW and Serena, that's 4 or 5 hours I'm not with someone else. And then you know how this works. People get mad, they're upset, they have their own hitting partners, taekwondo, boxing, ballet, and they never played any tournaments. That was crazy. Okay, that was a whole nother deal. So, but it wasn't a risk.
To me. That was news to me watching the movie. Yeah.
They were great competitors. Listen, if I could, that's not me, because I would recommend everybody to play tournaments. But they were so competitive, it didn't matter. Plus, they got squished like a bug every day playing better people a couple years older. So that's a whole different discussion. So I didn't feel it was a risk. I just knew, barring injury, this was different. And then, as you kind of saw in the movie, we had such a bond. They became like my own daughters, especially Venus, because she was older. Serena was still a little prankster. So it wasn't a risk, but it was millions of dollars. It was, besides hard assets. I mean, a $92,000 motorhome. My car was like $35,000. It had a bed, a TV. I mean, they went from the outhouse to the White House when they came to Greenleaf. It was a very different situation. You know what I mean? But it was the best time of my life because I loved the girls. It was part of a journey. We were like family, and I liked it because Richard was a rebel, and this was new. I kind of liked it because a lot of people didn't like him, and I probably wasn't as much the flavor of the month because I endorsed it. Even when I took her to make her debut in 1994 in Oakland, California, everybody wanted this little girl to fail. It was crazy. And the media wanted her to fail. Okay, I didn't know what was going to happen. I really didn't. Simply because no tournaments, 3.5 years, walking off the street. She played 58 in the world, Sean Stafford. I didn't know what was going to happen. All I knew was this. They would see this tall girl from Compton, California, run like the wind, great firepower, serving over 110 miles an hour, open stance backhand everywhere, like a praying mantis or an octopus on a court. But I didn't know how she'd handle the pressure. She could have been shooting missiles from North Korea into the crowd. I don't know. Yeah. But they knew they would see something that was very unique. The fact she won that match, listen to this. It's always in my head when she came up to the net and was jumping up and down like a human pogo stick and those beads flapping up and down, just like you saw in the movie. It was probably the happiest day of my life because right then and there, game, set, match, Richard Williams. 8 months later, $12 million contract from Reebok. And she almost beat Sanchez the next day, who was one in the world. So that really took it to another level. But then the wild card is fasten your seatbelt because the little sister is probably going to be better.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
When the Williams sisters started to gain notoriety, right, which is pretty early on, obviously, when Venus, played her first match, I think there was more media out there than, any other women's match probably in history of tennis, including Grand Slam finals. It was just mayhem. Considering that, and then what happened with Capriati, a teen sensation, winning a Grand Slam, at 15 years old, I think 15 or 16, an incredibly young age. And then starting to probably, the celebrity of it all, the attention, it took away from her game and potentially went down a path, the wrong path, obviously not conducive to winning tennis matches. Was that kind of in the back of your mind throughout the Williams sisters starting to gain that fame? And how did you protect them from going down that? And I'm not trying to suggest anything or talk badly about Capriati, but obviously she went down one path and the Williams sisters went down another. How did you protect the Williams sisters from maybe following that same path?
First off, awesome question, but I got to back that truck up.
Okay.
Different family dynamic. Okay. Yep. You got to understand different upbringing. Listen, if I didn't see what I saw in Venus and Serena at 9 and 10, I would have never done this. I knew they were bulletproof. Okay. And then when they had success, I knew it wasn't going to change just because of how Richard was or Scene was. Okay. They were groomed to do this. Richard was only going to let Venus play a little bit at age 15 and 16 anyways. Even though we made the debut, they changed the rule in 94. So we had to kind of play because Richard didn't want anybody to dictate how much he could play. So he was going to let her be a kid, and I just knew it wasn't going to change. Jennifer's situation was very different. She didn't really win a Grand Slam. She just got to be top 10 in the world at 14. She didn't win a Grand Slam until later on. But Jennifer was a lot more sensitive. She was more happy-go-lucky. She had a lot of normal friends. Venus and Serena just had some acquaintances. It was a very tight-knit family. Richard didn't let anybody penetrate that bubble, which is important. And, nowadays with kids, there's so many things that get into your head or what you read or hear. So, and Jennifer was like a normal kid going to a normal school and unfortunately did normal things and hit a speed bump. But I need to talk about Jennifer because she's one of my all-time favorite students, because she was one of my first. And she was like, her father's no longer alive. Stefano was great. The mom, just a great lady. Jennifer disappeared off the face of the earth. And people need to understand, this is, to me, one of the best movies of all time. And I'm not sure why that hasn't been done. She disappears off the face of the earth. She kind of wants to come back. She's around 150. I worked with her a little bit when she was older, but no one believed in this girl except three people: Stefano Capriati, Denise Capriati, and Rick Maccis. Listen, you don't lose the talent. You don't lose the ability. Listen, if you're 14 years old and top 10 in the world, give me a break. Or if you win the girls 18 as a 12-year-old, that will never be done. So you don't lose the magic. You lose the confidence and the fitness. So Jennifer, she started to come back, She didn't come back to 50, which would have been amazing. Not 20, not 10. She came all the way back after disappearing to number 1 in the world, 3 Grand Slams, Olympic gold medal, huge contract from FILA. Listen, she beat everybody. She beat Serena. She beat everybody. So you talk about the American dream, the comeback. Even though that happened to Jennifer, look how it ended up. She came all the way back and became a 3-time Grand Slam champion and Olympic gold medalist. So I think there should be looked at that instead of the poster child, too much too soon. I don't think that was the case. I think wrong environment, wrong kids, you get in trouble. You don't even want to talk to the media because the first question is about that, not about how well you hit the tennis ball.
Totally makes sense. And you're right. It's not fair at all to throw shade on Capriati. She had an incredible career. Maybe it's just more pronounced because you coached both Capriati and the Williams, and the Williams became absolute superstars. So now it's like relative to the Williams, and that's not fair for anybody to compare against.
Yeah, no. And remember, every human's different. Me, you, everybody. Everybody's sensitive. How you take a punch. And Jennifer was very sensitive. But that also was her charming quality as a kid. And the media can be brutal. And even today, you're seeing a lot of people with more mental health problems. It's hard to put the blinders on or the earplugs. And it happens a little bit more with the females, the sensitivity. But that was a big part with Jennifer. And listen, the fact that if she would have just disappeared, then it's a different discussion we're kind of having. But I look at it differently because she came all the way back and she kicked butt and took names.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just jumping topics here a little bit, you've had some students that you could see from very early on that they had the potential to be, top 10 in the world. How do you approach students and parents when And how do you determine, from an early age, you probably can see it very quickly if this kid could be, potentially 500 in the world or top 20 in the world. And how do you approach that? If the kid is driven, if the parents are driven to see them succeed, do you approach it in different ways?
Absolutely. Well, first off, I've done so many podcasts, and the questions you're throwing at me are so real. Okay, from a coaching point of view, I'm going to send you a hoodie and a T-shirt. Okay, I'll tell you, no, because these are real things that happen. A lot of times coaches might tell the parent what they want to hear. The one thing with me, I tell them what they don't want to hear. Okay. And so that sometimes maybe not might be best for business. With girls, young girls, it's much easier because there's not as much physicality as there is with a boy. I had Roddick, got him to number 1 in the country as a 12-year-old. If someone would have said he's going to win the US Open at 19 or 20, I probably would have taken that bet. But he grew 7 inches. His serve got 25 miles faster. His forehand became nuclear. He was a brutal competitor. I'm telling you, his thirst for competition, he actually played Serena. Okay, they were both there at the same time. It was a Compton street fight versus a Texas cowboy. It was the funniest thing. But Roddick was much better. Serena wasn't as good at 11. But my point is, I look for a couple things. Listen, Sharapova at 11, she was in a bubble. It's hard for me to describe. And I'm on the record. Back then, she'll be number 1 in the world. But she wasn't the greatest athlete. Her change of direction wasn't like I had, the Williamses. But she was there mentally. Her ability to forget, her ability to remember, to forget, it's the hardest thing to teach, as you know. Every point, bang. I can go on the record. She was probably the mentally strongest player I had with forgetting what just happened. But it was already there at 11. Her forehand was very crazy. I wanted to change her to left-handed. So did her dad. That's a whole nother podcast. But her backhand was a knife through butter. But mentally, if you're there every point and you have something going, you're going to handle pressure better. So I called it. She'll be 1 in the world. I said that at 11. She was. I said it with Kenin from age 5 to 12. I had Sophia Kenin, scariest little creature I ever had. She'll win a Grand Slam by 20. I was wrong. It was 21. People just looked. She was small, no firepower. She knew the geometry of the court. She could take it on the rise, give you a surprise, tear out your eyes. I took her to many USPTA conventions. I did many videos with her, but people can't see it. But I knew where that was going to go. It's easier with a girl. Okay. Much easier with a girl when they're younger. So with Venus, Serena, Sharapova, Capriati, Kenin, I called it when they're younger. There was another girl, she got injured. She was more like 14. I was wrong. But listen, I'm going to be wrong. I didn't see it in Roddick, but I knew he'd be a top pro. Now, to answer your question, tens of thousands of people that see the video, and I think it's just on Twitter, I put it on, of Serena at 11, my kid's better than that. Because everybody's looking at the car, but they don't lift under the hood. They don't look under the hood. Right. They don't see, and most parents don't know what's going on. They're going to look at it differently because it's their kid. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I look for speed. I look for quickness. I look for the mental part. I look at the family dynamic. It's a little more baked in from my experience with Eastern European families. They're a little more hungrier. They got a few boxes checked. They're a little more rougher and tougher. So I kind of look at that, but that can be cultivated also. The technical, I don't worry about. I just had a girl from Ukraine. I got a couple. She has all these boxes checked. Sure, her mom ran track at the highest level. Her dad was a pro goalie. I like to hit the ground running, but the Williams family hit the genetic jackpot. They weren't super high level athletes, but they did play sports. And Venus and Serena have 2 different bodies, but they could both run like the wind, stop on a dime. But the wild card was the competitiveness, just brutal. But you can teach people to become better competitors, as you know. But if a lot of those things are there, that's what I evaluated on. It's not that they look like perfect on the forehand or backhand, which Jennifer had, but she had no serve. She just kind of got it in like Chrissy did. Okay. Right. So there's many factors that go into this. And like you said, big difference going to college for free and being 100 in the world, 50, where the sky's the limit. If I think the sky's the limit, then, it's game on. I love that.
Right. And you mentioned, teaching obviously the Williams and other juniors focused on doing the right things and potentially resulting in losses, in the under 14s, even in the under 16s. But if you do the right things and you work on the right mechanics, that in the long run, you'll be much better off. I remember reading the Agassi book, and I think he mentioned that as well, about losing early on because he was hitting the ball out a lot. But a coach or his father potentially was saying that's the right thing to do as long as you're not putting in the net. You know what I mean? You're not kind of like letting up on your shots. You're going after them. It'll make you a better player. Is this true? And how do you deal with the pressure from parents as well, wanting their kids to start winning from an early age versus you insisting that this is the right approach?
Listen, you're on fire today with the questions. That's the toughest thing to say. You have a lot of potential, or it's about the future. That's what I loved about Venus and Serena. On Monday, there wasn't like a major sporting event about what happened over the weekend, and then we break it down microscopically. Everybody's freaking out. How'd you lose that little kid? She's a pusher. You get into all the insanity, as you know. So that's what I liked about not playing tournament, but they were so competitive. I wasn't worried about that. If there was a piece of bread on the table, Venus Serena would fight over it, or the first to get a drink. I mean, I wasn't worried about that with them, but it's the toughest thing to do. No one missed more swing volleys in practice than Venus Williams. And I would have many coaches watch, or the USTA, and they'd watch and they'd see all these mistakes and they'd say, she's not that good. She's not that good. She's not that good, because they want the ball to go in, but they were positive errors. And that's one of the cornerstone of my coaching, to promote courage, not be afraid to pull the trigger. Now, if the guy's an idiot or knucklehead or whatever, or they're missing it because they're nervous, you got to be able to, correct that. But you got to get out of the moment, because after 12, you're 14. And after 14, you're going to be 18. Are we trying to go to college for free, or you want to be great? And you got to have courage. And if you look at all the players, especially on the female side, there's common threads. Moschina, Pierce, Kennan, Sharapova, Venus, Serena, Capriati. They all cut the court. They take the ball early. There's no fear. They eat the second serve for breakfast. They love swing volleys. There's a lot of common threads, but I do that with every player, especially on the female side, because there's a lot more to select on the menu, but you got to get them to buy into it. And I've had others that they want to be the best junior and win now, and they're afraid to hit the ball. They're afraid to come to the net. And if they come to the net, they're not coming for a month. The more volleys you miss, the more you're going to make. The best volleyers of all time have missed the most overheads and the most volleys. Okay. And I could get into Bethany Maddox-Sands, who I coach. She loved to play doubles. She always came in. I told her dad, singles, there's something there, but doubles, everybody's going to want to play mixed doubles with this girl, and women's doubles. And you know what? Unbelievable doubles player. She knew where you're going to hit it before you did. It's a mindset. It's an attitude, but it's the hardest sell in junior tennis, because dinner tastes better. The cocktail party's more fun when your kid has a trophy. They could have won, but maybe developing, they're really losing.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you just referenced, coaching junior girls versus junior boys in different ways. And I think you mentioned it on the Patrick McEnroe podcast as well. And something that actually, I think it surprised me because, and I could be wrong, but I think you insinuated that with the girls, you're more focused on hitting the ball harder, taking it early, cutting off the angles. With men, it's slightly different, where I could see that. But at the same time, I feel like there's an opportunity for women because, it's gone in a way where it's just the Sabalenkas of the world, you know what I mean? Where it's just Kvitovas of the world, where it's just like big serve, hit a big forehand, and there's not much diversity to the games. How do you coach young women versus young men? And is the women's game just going to be about hard hitting because maybe the movement's not quite there? So that's where the advantage is?
Well, if you can't move, you better have firepower off both sides, like Sharapova, so you can hide your mobility. That's why against Serena, she was 2-20 because Serena knew she had to punch first. So, but no, if you can't move, you better hit clean, hard, and flat and run the show. But that being said, I try to teach everybody like Ash Barty or like Mahova. I have a Ukrainian girl right now who's number one in Europe. I think the sky's the limit. I want her to drop. I want her to chip. I want her to roll the ball. But listen, firepower trumps everything. If you're authoritative off both wings and you can run the show and you have a big serve and you've covered the 3 big ticket items, that's the name of the game. You're dealing the cards. But if you can diffuse power like Barty and have some athleticism like Barty, okay, I think that's a tough matchup for the Sabalenkas and these people that just want to crush the ball.
Right.
But let's face it, I'm criticizing the number 1 player in the world, and Iga's running the show too. No, I try to teach versatility. I teach more drop shots than anybody. Whoever taught Alcaraz as a youngster, he missed more drop shots. I should send that guy a hoodie because he said, keep doing it. So he does it on break point in a tiebreaker. So you know that belief with him is baked in double crispy, where when you miss a drop shot, because he's changing how the game's being taught, most coaches say, why'd you do that? But if it goes in, they love you. Like shooting a 3-pointer from 30 feet, the coach freaks out unless you make it. So I teach the boys got to have everything. They got to have everything. And a lot of the boys, I'm glad you brought it up. Back in the day, I mentioned this with Patrick. When Patrick was general manager at USTA, they had me come as a consultant. And I helped Tiafo. There was Fritz there. There was Opelka. All the guys were 12, 13, 14. But the best one of all of them was the guy who never missed, but he didn't have as much firepower. He dropped all of them like flies. Now he's in the 200s, and all those guys are in the top 20 because they're building weapons. It's more than just the mental. You got to have weapons, but you got to buy into that. And that's the hardest sell to any parent.
Right. That's super interesting. And just moving to different topics slightly here, but there are a lot of similarities to what we're just discussing. I know that you're really focused on biomechanics. And speaking of Roddick, sorry, that's my coffee machine turning off in the background right now. Speaking of biomechanics and Roddick, I listened to Roddick on a podcast. Apparently, I listen to a lot of tennis podcasts. That's kind of what I do. He was talking about Jimmy Connors. Jimmy Connors coaching him for a little while and improving his backhand. And he said something along the lines of his backhand was always gave him problems. And then Connors told him one thing, and that's to, with your left hand, to kind of like, or keep your left arm loose, he said. And it fixed, he said, about 5 different things in his swing. It made him improve his movement because he had to get close to the ball. He couldn't reach as much. It did a number of things that it allowed him to put more topspin on the ball, etc. How do you as a coach look at, a player where there's maybe, 4 or 5 things wrong in their stroke and you can say one thing that will improve all of those pieces?
Yeah, no, I can see Andy saying that with Jimbo helping on his backhand. Because one word, or even how you say it, or why you say it, or when to say it, and how you rephrase it could change someone's stroke a little bit. It's not going to be reconstructive surgery. Roddick's return of serve was actually really good because it was very stable. But the problem I had with Roddick's backhand, I felt he played too far back, and it became a running contest, and you got to be more of a grinder and be able to hit with a little more spin, okay? And kind of like, the Spanish players. So I don't think his court positioning was that good the way he hit his backhand. Remember, Connors hovered the baseline. Alcaraz can do both, okay? But Roddick's left hand was always like a little stiff and straight, and that helps kind of the return of serve. But for versatility, disguise, and deception, it wasn't the best. But you're right. One way to say it or one tweak, and I think that's what happens more on the pro tour. Because people don't want to do reconstructive surgery like I've been approached maybe to do that with Coco's forehand. It's a weapon. It's a liability. She's so fast. She can hide it. But it could be much better. But when do you take time off to learn the ATP forehand? And speaking of Roddick, who he kind of taught me, okay, in 92, he had his elbow up. The racket was to the outside. And I'm sitting there going, whoa, what is this? It looked like it was kind of army and wristy, but his contact point never deviated. And I sat there going, I'm just going to let him keep doing it. And as time went on, it was blistering, where I was a little bit, Tommy Ho kind of did that, but I didn't know what was going on back then. So Roddick kind of taught me on the forehand, and I tried to show it. Then obviously as time went on, my collaboration with Dr. Brian Gordon, and that's kind of become the staple, shorter stroke, hitting side, racket goes faster, the pull, the flip. I coined tap the dog, how the racket went. So I broke it down. But no, the game has changed so much. I think everybody should be doing it, but I'm not so stuck in my way. There's a wrong way or a right way. There's a better way. If they want to do WTA and go to the inside and do more of a semicircle, I'm all for it. But there is a better way. Remember, 2023, the balls are going 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. This isn't even 1995 or 2000. The game has changed so much. Movement is a premium. And I think stroke mechanics are at an all-time high. You look at Djokovic's backhand or even Agassi. He was kind of ahead of his time with the mechanics. But the forehand, why do the guys hit it different? I think it's all coaching. Then you get someone like Brady. She does this. There's other girls in the neighborhood, and I try to teach everybody to be in the neighborhood at least of the ATP forehand, but a lot of them don't want to do it, especially when I get some of these girls at 16, 17. I work with about 30 girls on the tour, and they're older. They want help, but they can't really change. So it's more strategic and mental.
Right. I feel like that's actually more accepted. Even like, you mentioned previously when we were talking, about starting out as a golfer, and it's both in tennis and golf where it's more accepted now that different players can have different strokes as long as, at that contact point, they're in the right position. You look at Scotty Scheffler and, his back foot completely slips out, when he's making contact, which, when I was young, if you didn't have a stroke that looked like it was supposed to be, everyone's stroke was supposed to look exactly the same. Now it's more accepted that you can have different looking strokes, but as long as you can get that timing there and you have that swing speed at contact point, it doesn't really, matter as much. Obviously, there's certain fundamentals there that are needed, but I like that approach where some players are just more comfortable doing certain things. Like if you look at Tiafoe, who I was watching live in the Laver Cup a couple of weeks ago here in Vancouver, what I noticed is you're right, just how short some of his swings are. His serve, he holds it up and it's basically a flick of the wrist. Whereas, back in the day, the elbow was supposed to be low and he can generate so much pop just from that. It's crazy. So I guess everyone's different and it's really about racket head speed and contact point.
Well, let me chime in on that because I know Francis well, spent a lot of time with him at the after party after the movie. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just talk about that. How you take the racket back, I use that as a corrective technique, or even how you follow through. If you've seen a lot of stuff I've done, it's a corrective technique to maybe get more spin or hit the ball flatter. I changed the muscle memory, just like that 80-year-old guy I was telling you about. I changed his elbow position. He used to hit his forehand like Connors. You've been mentioning Connor. He goes, Rick, I never hit topspin in my life. And I did it with an 80-year-old. You talk about muscle memory. That guy's baked in triple crispy. That's 70 years of hitting a Jimbo forehand. And even his counterparts at the Nationals saw it. So my point is how you take the racket back. The brain cannot relate to that because it's new. It's fresh out of the oven, how you take it back. So you got to change the beginning or the origin, and then that can kind of expedite things, and the before, during, and after kind of can autocorrect. So, but how you take it back, okay, is a personal interpretation of taking it back. You can see everybody. Rafa takes it back a little different than Federer or Roddick, or we could go, everybody takes it back. But how you get the contact. Now, here's what's tricky. Is it shifting the contact point under pressure? When we're hand feeding or basket feeding, or when the stars are shining and everything's great, that's different. Does it bubble up under pressure? Okay. And that's the moment of truth. So even how people take the racket back, you should change and experiment. And that's what I do different than anybody in the world. I change the backswing, how they take it back, and people freak out, especially adults who have done stuff for a long period of time. They are freaked out. Okay, their racket's faster. I get more spin. They get it for free. They just freak out. So I work with a lot of adults too, Zoom and in person. So at the end of the day, that has a lot to do with it. But one way to take it back, I'm glad you brought up golf. Look at Jim Furyk. At the top, he did the vanilla shake on steroids, but his contact point never changed. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes the best coaching, keep your mouth shut, look at it over a long period of time against different players, different situations, hard court and clay, and then you make an evaluation. Then if you got to go back to the drawing board and break it down microscopically, then that's when you do it.
It's interesting that you mentioned pressure, and I don't think it gets talked about enough, but there are probably some players that you've coached that were incredible tennis players on the practice court, did everything right, could beat their counterparts easily on the practice court. And when it came to tournaments and game time, they tighten up. They just couldn't win because the pressure was too much. How do you deal with that? And have you experienced that where you've had a student that was absolutely incredible in the practice court, but just like some people just can't deal with the pressure like others can?
1,000,000%. Okay. Listen, this is the wild card. There's a lot of wild cards I have, but this is the wild card. This is what separates great from good. This is rare air. I'm just telling you, this is rare air. And before I answer the question, when Coco almost lost first round of the Open, that Houdini escape 6-4 in the third against that girl who was like the butcher, slicing and dicing and hacking, and everybody started hating right then and there. And I came out and said, listen, that's a gold nugget in her pocket the rest of her life. Ash Stadium, 7:00, celebrating Billie Jean King, equal pay. She's the chosen one. Serena's out the door. And she found a way to win. Now, that usually makes people think, yeah, but she's playing bad. So here we are. She's U.S. Open champion. So to answer your question about that with the pressure, okay, this is what I have to work with everybody on, having the ability to flip it. You got 20 seconds to make it 20 years. Go back to the fence. That's what I said about Sharapova. It was crazy. Even though the movement wasn't a jackrabbit, the forehand was brutal. I had to do She followed through more like this just so I could get a vertical component. That's a whole nother discussion, to the point where Dad said, Rick, let's have her play left-handed. It's crazy. That's how deep that mistake was. I'm going to switch you to left-handed because the dad thinks he made a mistake early on. That's really deep. But he said, Rick, I care about the future. So, but the pressure stuff, when you're all about the competition and you love to play, and that's what I try to talk to the kids more about. And that's why I went out 3 years ago and said this about this Alcaraz guy, the Spanish magician. He's a Broadway performer. He's skipping and hopping and smiling, but it comes from the heart, besides all the other attributes. Okay, obviously. But that's the wild card. And that's why I went out and kind of anointed him. He'll be number one. He has unlimited potential, barring injury. I've never seen anything like it. He's a combination of Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, all wrapped in one, and Agassi. I never saw anything like this young man if he doesn't get hurt. But the pressure, I see it all the time. Great in practice. That's why I tell people in practice, I'll do things like this. Listen, they're serving a ball. I'll say something like this. You're serving great, and you haven't double faulted yet today. And the parent gets mad at me if they double fault. That's the real world. That's why Richard Williams got it. He loved that type of stuff. Give me the best cheater in the academy. And I go, we got a lot of those. Let me get anybody you want. He wanted the real world. This is the real world, to handle pressure. You can't coddle the kids. This is not what it's about. But I see that all the time. They're great in practice. That probably means they're going to have good strokes. They'll have a lot of good stuff going on. Unfortunately, coaches start trying to get them not to lose because they want the ball in play, and you might get a few more W's. Division 2 or 3 might be on the menu, not a full ride Division 1. There's different levels to this, but it's all how you look at it. I just gave a speech today. You'll like this. I told the kids, if you were down 6-0, 5-0, could it be the best day of your life? And I asked like all 20. And all 20, you know what they said? No way, Jose. And I said, well, how many of you would answer that way if you were down 6-0, 5-0, and Alcaraz, you were here playing him? Every one of them said it'd be the best day of their life. I said, wait a minute. It's still a court. It's still a ball. You're still getting crushed like a grape. Okay. See, it's all how they frame it up. Yeah. And it's different. They take practice. It's still the same. And a lot of these players that have success, they get millions. Everything changes, but it's me and you on a court, showtime. That's what I loved about Roddick. He was all about the competition. He never really had any bad losses. He overachieved. He wasn't going to be Agassi or Sampras. He overachieved. Great competitor. And he was in a tough era. So to answer your question, you got to get them to love it, love pressure. You got to work with them a lot on that. And I tell everybody, especially adults, right before you hit the ball, smile. It's a game changer for your nervous system.
I also think that, what's really helpful for players is to, even in practice, and you kind of insinuate to this, but always have something on the line. And what I found interesting was I watched it when it came out a couple of years ago, the Michael Jordan documentary on Netflix. It was like, that 10 episode documentary on him. And it's widely known that Jordan has always been a big gambler, right? But it even started early on when he was, in high school and he didn't have the millions of dollars to gamble at the casinos. He'd always have something on the line. He always wanted to bet on something. And it just added an element of pressure. Even otherwise, if he'd just be out with his friends shooting hoops, there was something on the line and it added that element of pressure. And I think that it carried with him throughout his career. And obviously, the stakes got much larger. You know what I mean? When you're in the NBA championship finals, shooting, the last shot with 2 seconds left on the clock. But just having those life experiences of all those built up moments where there was something on the line, it gave him the confidence. It allowed him to kind of breathe a little bit more easy than other players would. Do you agree with that? And do you try to put something on the line with your young students at all times?
First off, I agree 100% with that. And you're absolutely right. All your failures will lead to your success. You need pressure. I put pressure on the kids all the time. Unfortunately, some kids would rather take a lesson or drill than tee it up. And if they beat someone, like if you beat someone, and this is why I kind of got mentally strong as a kid, I didn't have a lot of people to play. So I wanted to beat the guy. If I beat him 4-3, I wanted to beat him 2-2, then 1-2. When I had nothing to gain and everything to lose, it made me mentally stronger. So I didn't have a lot of bad losses as a junior because I never beat myself. Where everybody plays better when they play better people, and they play worse when they play worse people. And that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. You should play worse when you play better people because they're better. And you should play better when they're worse because you're better. Everybody has it backwards. But if that was the case, Alcaraz and Djokovic would have no one to play. But I put a Coke on the line, $20. One serve. I set the score. I inflict pressure. And the parent that doesn't understand this, or they can't get this out, listen, if they're not going to listen to me, I've been around the block, you know what I mean? And I've been there, done that. Who are they going to listen to? But it's hard because they love their kid and they do it out of love and they want to protect. But the best lessons, that's why I love Richard Williams. I mean, it was brutal. I'm just telling you, one time Venus played a match. I kind of said it. He goes, Rick, give me someone who's going to cheat her. I said, oh, that's easy. He goes, and tell the guy when he hit the line, call him out. I go, okay, he might do that anyways. And then he took a few Budweiser beer bottles. He threw them on the back of the court, back by the fence. I had to sweep the glass back. He goes, BW, don't back up. Rick wants you to take the ball right off the bounce. But that was baked in way before Rick Maccis at age 11. You know what I mean? All the life lessons that they were rough and tough. And Serena was a pit bull. He knew that she could take a punch. And if you can get that, especially, you got to have that as a guy. And that when you're like that, you'll handle pressure better. I need everybody watching this. Everybody chokes. Everybody gets nervous. Jordan, Braden, Alcaraz, Federer, and everybody chokes. You just can't see it as much. They might put more spin. The racket's slowing down. They can hide it more on the Pro Tour. You know what I'm saying? Or they can save it with their foot speed. And I even knew Venus and Serena on a bad day could just out athlete you and run around like a little rodent and get the ball back and win the match. So they can mask it better. Everybody chokes. Everybody gets nervous. The great ones just don't do it as much. So everybody needs to understand that. But if you love the competition, and you can smile more on the court, because people make it out to be brain surgery, and brain surgery is a lot more important than a tennis match. But it's hard to look at it like that.
Right. Rick, it's been an absolute honor speaking with you. You're an absolute legend. This was a lot of fun. Before I let you go, just for my listeners, how can people find you? I know you have a great book out there. You're on social media. How can everyone follow you?
Okay, well, first off, then go to Instagram. I've got a lot of followers there. YouTube, a lot of free content. I'm also starting up the season 3 podcast with my partner, David Meltzer, one of the top motivational speakers in the world, Game Set Life. with Macci and Meltzer. He's like, we're both from Ohio, the Buckeye connection there. So that will be starting up again in December. Okay, people, if they ever have any questions, they could email me. I'm very accessible, as you know, info@rickmacci.com. My phone number's out there. When people call me, they go, wait a minute, is this Rick Macci? Then they kind of hear the voice from the movie, and it is. They want me to look at a video. It's on the website, how to do that. I have a collection of videos. A lot of people do that. Over 30,000 people have purchased NetRicks. It's a collection of videos, less than $100. It's like under 10 minutes. It's a whole medley of how to coach, be a better parent, all the strokes, that type of stuff. But if they're ever in Florida, I'm on court number 1. And what's interesting, I teach 4-year-olds. I teach people on the Pro Tour. I teach the best juniors in the world. I teach adults. I just love to help anybody, anytime, anywhere. That's why I do a lot of podcasts. So hopefully people can pick up a few of these gold nuggets. But if they get a hold of me, I'll get back to them in 24 hours.
Rick, your content, I've watched a lot of your content on biomechanics, et cetera. It's been super helpful. You coached actually a friend of mine in Florida. He was on the court with you for an hour. He said it was the best session of his life, hands down.
What's his name?
Randall Takasaki.
Yes, I remember Randall. He's from Canada. I did reconstructive surgery. Am I in the neighborhood? Is he from Canada or New York?
He's a member at my tennis club. He's in Vancouver. And he is an absolute beauty, and he's got a great watch collection. I have to just throw that out there for Randall.
Wow, that was like 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, listen. Like I still remember.
You have that memory with. How do you must be so passionate about what you do that you can remember you teach different people every 7 days a week on the court. How do you remember everybody?
I don't know. It's just all in there. And here's what's crazy: most people, I don't sometimes remember them because we all look a lot different, but I remember their nickname or I remember where they're from. Remember, I just went right to Canada. You know what I'm saying? I went right to, when I heard the name, it was like, I used to call him like Canada or whatever. And I got to tell this real quick. I taught Christian Ruud, Casper's father. And out of nowhere, you got Casper getting interviewed. He goes, listen, they asked him because he won 4 tournaments in a row. They go, how do you do this? He goes, well, listen, one of the lessons my father passed along was a winner finds a way and a loser makes an excuse. And my father learned that back from his coach, Rick Macci, because he went to his academy. And that came out of nowhere. But once again, you can pass it down to your child, but they got to buy in. But listen, they live their life, no excuses. That's a great lesson for anybody, whether in the game of tennis or in the game of life. No excuses.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great place to end it. Rick, thanks again. There's a lot of other topics, just even about life coaching, etc., that, maybe if you would take the time, I'd love to have you on the pod again down the road. We could cover some other topics, but thank you so much for your time. It is very much appreciated.
No, we'll definitely
You're a legend and a beauty.
Do it again.
All right, Rick. Have a great day.
Thank you.